Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So, CableLabs in a interoperability event demonstrated that they can do 8 gigabit down and 1.5 gigabit up using a DOCSIS 3.1 CMTS. So I'll be right back with the details. Thanks for joining me, Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So I want to take a look at this. I thought this was pretty interesting. So cable operators can get up to 8 gig without end-to-end DOCSIS 4.0. So most people were thinking that you'd need to have fully end-to-end DOCSIS 4.0, a DOCSIS 4.0 CMTS, and DOCSIS 4.0 modems in order to get these kinds of speeds. But what they demonstrated, because CableLabs is very good about when they bring out a new version of DOCSIS, making sure that everything's backward compatible. So that if you have a DOCSIS 3.0 modems out there, even DOCSIS 2 or 1.0 modems out there, they still work. Now, you're not going to be able to take advantage of most of the new things that come out with the next version of DOCSIS, but they're backward compatible. So cable operators don't need to take their CPE and toss them out as soon as a new version of DOCSIS comes out. But again, in order to take advantage of some things, they do need to upgrade equipment. But in this case, they were able to look at the CMTS and keep it as a DOCSIS 3.1 CMTS, and only with the DOCSIS 4.0 modem they were able to get these speeds. Now, I'm assuming there were other things they had to do to be able to do this, and one of them we know is a high split, which I'll explain in a minute. But so you see here, DOCSIS 4.0 has been billed as a technology that will put cable operators on par with 10G PON service from fiber providers. But a recent CableLabs interoperability event showed cable companies can hit over 8 gig with a mix of new and old gear. Now, on par with XGS PON, 10G PON, that's something that I think eventually, by the time that is really needed from anything, let's say beyond a marketing checkbox, that a lot of cable operators are going to be replacing their DOCSIS plant with fiber. So I'm thinking several years down the road. You don't need XGS PON now, and most people don't need, frankly, gig PON right now. They can get by, with GPON, they can get by just fine on that. So the XGS stuff, again, that's a checkbox, and they'll have new checkboxes coming out where they'll be doing 50 gig and then 100 gig. And, cable's not going to be able to keep up with that. They're not going to even try. So they're going to be going to all fiber networks in the future. Right now, what they're trying to do is get the most that they can of their DOCSIS network so they can get higher speeds and try to get close to what fiber operators can promise, both on the downstream side, but also they're trying to get as close as they can on high symmetrical speeds because, again, marketing checkbox. Nobody needs a gig up speed right now. You can get gig symmetrical service from a fiber operator, but people don't need the upload that fast. And frankly, again, most of them don't need a gig down either, but they have it, and they're happy to have it, I'm sure, but it's not required. There's just not enough there are not enough applications out there that are going to require that in general. So CableLabs principal architect Doug Jones told Fierce Telecom that during a DOCSIS 4.0 interoperability event held at its facilities in Denver last month, operators demonstrated speeds of 8 point something. I love that. So he's probably going based on memory. Makes me wonder a little bit, but I'm sure he had the over 8 part right. So they were probably, and it wouldn't be the same for everybody. It could be 8.1, 8.3, depending on what the equipment was and the particular environment that it was set up in. I'm assuming this was all done in a really pristine environment, lab environment, short runs, no noise, those kinds of things. So you have to take that into account. This would not have been a production in-field deployment. But again, 8 point something gigabits per second downstream and 1.5 gig upstream. So obviously that really competes well. I mean, again, that's over a gig upstream in a pristine environment. We're talking about cable here, so you've got RF issues and noise that can get in the plant, all kinds of things that can take these speeds down. But this is a really nice speed to be starting out with. So this was up to 1.5 up. But rather than using an end-to-end 4.0 system, this was done using a DOCSIS 3.1 cable modem termination system, or a CMTS. That's basically the piece of equipment that the cable modem's attached to, where they're getting their service from, in a high split configuration and a DOCSIS 4.0 modem. The trick, he said, was getting these two pieces of equipment to talk to each other. So again, you've got interoperability testing, and you've got a new standard of DOCSIS and an old standard of DOCSIS, and trying to get them to talk to each other. Again, it mentions that this was a DOCSIS 3.1 CMTS, and the CMTSs these days can be not just sitting in a head end somewhere, a big piece of iron that's serving a bunch of customers. It could be something that's out in the field that's closer to the customer in a remote MAC-PHY kind of a deployment where you've got the CMTS out there being fed by fiber. So it could be something like that. So again, there's lots of things in here that you have to take into account that even though it could be a DOCSIS 3.1 CMTS, there are things that the service provider I would imagine, have to do in order to be able to get these kinds of speeds that they might not have done yet, or maybe they need to do more of that. And that one of those things would be, going closer to the edge with fiber through stuff like remote MAC-PHY or remote PHY, distributed access architecture, in order to be able to get higher speeds and more and less RF interference throughout that process because you've got less coax. It mentions high splits here in this case. So a high split, these are the splits normally that you'd see in a cable plant these days. So you've got your traditional split has been this, what they call now a sub-split, where you're going up to 750 or 800 megahertz. And then the high splits are where you're going up to 750 to 1 gig. And then, excuse me, that's the mid-split, 750 to 1 gig. And then the high splits are going up to 1 or 1.2 gigs. And actually, I think 1.8 gig is maybe super high or ultra high splits. So you can see here, as you do that, you get more bandwidth available for your upstream as well as your downstream. And really, the big point of these high splits, mid splits, and high splits is to increase the upstream. As you can see here, there's, that's where a lot of these splits are taking you, is to be able to increase the amount of upstream you can have, because that has been traditionally in a cable plant. That's not been as important for anybody, for that matter, in the internet world, because most of what you're doing, you're consuming as opposed to producing data. Right now I'm producing data by streaming this, but I don't do this all day long. And this is not I could still do this over, a couple of hundred megabits per second probably, and have other things going on in the home. So I don't need a gig to do that. But you can see here the growth has been on the upstream side, because that is primarily where the usage has been and continues to be. But as people are using more, we've needed more. So the old you see here, the sub-splits is not really enough now. And so people need higher than they were able to get in the past. And we've seen that really impacting technologies like DSL, for example, both on the downstream and then also the upstream, where the technology is restricted. So cable or DOCSIS has been able to keep up with this by doing these mid splits and these high splits, and like I say, the distributed access architecture, pushing things out to the edge. And so I'm, in addition to the mid and the high splits, they're having to do some of those other things. And I'm not sure about things like amplifiers either. So I think that the amplifiers for DOCSIS 4.0 need to be maybe changed out, or that may only have to be the case if you're going to be doing full duplex. So I could be wrong there. I'm not sure. Maybe through traditional amplifiers, you can do high splits, and maybe they support that. Again, I don't know if you need a new amplifier to do some of these higher splits or not. But in any event, obviously, again, this was a lab environment, and I'm assuming they'd have to do some other things in their plant to make sure that they can get these increased speeds. But the real news is that they could do this on a DOCSIS 3.1 CMTS with a DOCSIS 4.0 modem, so they don't need to swap out the CMTS. And when you do that, again, because these modems and CMTS are all interoperable, you could, if you had a customer that needed higher speeds, and let's say they sign up for a package that would give them over a gig, maybe they want a 4 gig package or a 5 gig package, something like that, then you can send that customer a DOCSIS 4.0 modem. You don't necessarily have to go out and completely, change out all of the CP in your network. You could do this just as customers need it. You can say, okay, we'll send you a new modem, and then you'll be able to get the higher speeds, and you can sign up for that. So this can make a big difference for, as it mentions here in a minute, smaller providers. So you see here, CMTS needs new software. So that's an easy fix. Again, this is just, you got your CMTS, you just need to do a firmware upgrade to that. The 3.1 CMTS needs to know what a 4.0 modem is and what it's capable of, Jones explained. The CMTS needs to be able to understand that, negotiate those capabilities, and send a set of capabilities back to the modem. to make it operational on the network. So that's your standard kind of thing when you have new technology. You get a firmware upgrade, and you're basically telling the CMTS additional information that it needs to know to provision these devices, to activate what it needs to activate. CableLabs and partners, including Arcadian, CASA, Cisco, CommScope, Harmonic, Sagemcom, not familiar with that one, Ubi, Vantiva, and Vesima were able to work through those issues at the July event, Jones said. So you've got several, you've got CMTS manufacturers here. You got Ubi, I don't know if they do a CMTS or just CPE. But you got several vendors here that are working together in this event, making sure, that things work together, and they're trying these things out. Among other things, they said they were able to get the 4.0 modems registered with the 3.1 CMTS systems, and both pieces of equipment to recognize new channels for data transmission. They were also able to validate the aforementioned speed performance metrics. So it wasn't just done once. It looks like different vendors tried this and were able to get these different pieces of equipment to talk to each other, the CMTS and the CPE. Easy upgrade rather than a replacement. For the end-to-end DOCSIS 4.0, Jones said this hybrid DOCSIS 3.1 CMTS plus DOCSIS 4.0 modem setup can serve as a stepping stone to it, especially for smaller regional operators who aren't on the bleeding edge of the developing technology. So this does help reduce costs as people want to bump up speeds but don't necessarily want to invest in a new CMTS. It says here it's also more economical and less of a lift than deploying a DOCSIS 4.0 CMTS in terms of the amount of back office work required, given operators would only need to install a software upgrade to their existing 3.1 CMTS to deploy the 4.0 modems rather than validating and deploying an entirely new system. So they don't have that capital cost. They don't have to learn new stuff. They should be able to just, again, upgrade the firmware on their CMTS and put in a DOCSIS 4.0 modem, and bam, they've got this additional speeds that they can provide. So that is a big deal. The interoperability testing builds confidence to get these DOCSIS 4.0 modems out quickly because changing a CMTS is more involved, he said, and that's true. So there would be no reason for service providers to buy DOCSIS 4.0 modems if they can't take advantage of that, which meaning if they had to have a DOCSIS 4.0 CMTS, they're not going to be buying 4.0 modems unless they come down in price such that it's like, well, we might as well get one now so that later when we get a DOCSIS 4.0 CMTS, then we'll have some of those available. But they wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't expect the prices to be, I'd expect there to be a significant price difference in the early going. So they can keep the CMTS they have now, and again, they can buy a limited number of 4.0 modems as they need them and not have to, again, swap out everybody. Indeed, Del Oro VP Jeff Hayen told Fierce this method of extending DOCSIS 3.1's lifespan can buy operators more time before they need to upgrade to an end-to-end DOCSIS 4.0 system. He reiterated that deploying CPE, that is modems, isn't super labor intensive either. It's not super labor intensive. Now, if you had to do it for everybody, it's a real big pain. And some of that's why cable operators are not ripping out their final last mile of coax and putting in fiber all the way to the customer, because you got to touch every customer. Now, in that case, you also have to, get your fiber even closer to the customer. Cable operators are trying to get the fiber as close as they can, but it's that last mile or so, that last bit, that's so expensive because, again, you got to replace that at every subscriber. Plus, you got to replace the CPE. Well, this way, again, while it's easy, they're probably going to do this kind of onesie-twosie as they go. And if they get a new customer, they may give them, again, if the price difference is not that big, they may give them a 4.0 modem instead of a 3.1 modem, that kind of thing. You can get the speed burst at a minimal cost, he said. I mean, the CPE is going to be expensive, but they knew they were going to pay for that anyway, so you might as well go ahead and get the speed benefit while you continue to go through the process of upgrading your outside plant. So, again, depending on the price difference, will determine how many of these 4.0 devices they get and deploy versus whether they do those just as needed. Eventually, prices on this equipment comes down, as more DOCSIS 3.1, as there's less DOCSIS 3.1, then the prices on that stuff, suddenly you'll see, suddenly you'll see deals on those things. So the price difference can remain. So as DOCSIS 4.0 modems come out, you start to see deals on DOCSIS 3.1 modems. So it takes a while for the prices to kind of even out there. And though some operators in Europe have said they're going to stop short of deploying DOCSIS 4.0, Jones noted they are paying attention to its interoperability work. He declined, however, to provide additional specifics about what this might mean for DOCSIS upgrades outside North America. Security in focus. The next step Jones added will come at an August interoperability event where vendors will tackle implementing security features. Every press release talks about speed, but the team has upped the ante on security with 4.0, Jones said. This includes implementing stronger encryption algorithms with ephemeral keys and enabling mutual authentication between the CMTS and modem rather than the single-side verification used today. The next interoperability event will be held by CableLabs the week of August 14th. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. And if this was helpful or interesting, if you give me a like on the video, I'd appreciate it. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button and click the bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. See you next time. Bye-bye.